Welcome to Hudson Institute's year-end celebration. I am Sarah May Stern, the chair of Hudson Institute. This year has certainly been unusual. This celebration, virtual, is unusual. So I'm going to begin this evening in an anything but usual fashion with a vocabulary lesson. Now, you may not have had a vocab lesson since junior high, middle school, but I think it is relevant for tonight. Our vocabulary word is privilege. Of late, people use this word with its first meaning, a special right, advantage, available only to a particular person or group. But I prefer the word's second definition, something regarded as a special honor, because it is my very special honor, my privilege, as Hudson's chair, to introduce this evening. In fact, it reflects the very best of Hudson tradition, not to rely on the obvious or usual interpretation of the world or of a word. So why is it my privilege? Because I get to thank you, our supporters, who despite or maybe because of the pandemic have contributed so generously to Hudson this year. It is my privilege because I am deeply proud of the high quality work and impact Hudson has had in 2020. It is my privilege because I can crow about Hudson's ability to influence policy regardless of who or which party is in control in DC or in other world capitals. It is my privilege because I share the stage, or this year the screen, with such impactful experts and world leaders. In tough times, the world needs Hudson more than ever, and that means we need everyone here tonight more than ever. Many thanks to each and every one of you. I am privileged to be in your presence. Finally, I have the very great privilege of announcing that our beloved CEO and president, Ken Weinstein, is moving on to become the Walter P. Stern Distinguished Fellow here at Hudson, and that John Walters, our COO, will become the next CEO and president as of January 1st. As most of you know, Ken joined Hudson in 1991 and has led the Institute with great distinction for 15 years. He turned Hudson into the policy powerhouse that it is today, all the while creating an environment in which strong experts thrive and collaborate. No small feat. Ken knows more about almost everything than anyone else I know. He is particularly expert on Asia and Europe. Most important, I count Ken not only as a leader, but as a very dear friend. I am delighted that he has decided to remain with us at Hudson. John Walters has been with Hudson since 2009 as our COO, as well as directing our political studies program. Before coming to Hudson, he served as drug czar in the cabinet of President George W. Bush. I hope that all of you here tonight have the opportunity to get to know John in the upcoming months. As we look to the next chapter of Hudson, we could have no better leader. But before we look ahead, we all have the privilege of doing what Hudson experts do before they make policy recommendations, understanding where we're coming from. Enjoy the next few minutes.
The Hudson Institute understands something that's very important. American leadership is indispensable to the advancement of freedom.
Hudson is an American think tank providing cutting-edge policy work on national security, economics, foreign policy, and on U.S. domestic policy.
I'm so proud of what Hudson continues to accomplish. Hudson's been at the forefront of policy development for decades.
I regularly rely on Hudson Institute scholars to help inform my thinking and the way I help shape policy here in the Senate.
Our analysis and recommendations have never been in greater demand by the U.S. government and by governments around the world. We help leaders and citizens better understand threats and how to meet them effectively.
For more than a half a century, this institute has dedicated itself to advancing global security, prosperity, and freedom. You've always advanced that vital truth, that American leadership lights the way.
We operate differently from most other think tanks in looking at the evolution of threats and beginning with the biggest challenges, whether it be Japan, India, France, Germany, Americans and our allies want to better understand the dangers of the future and the options for reducing those dangers.
I want to thank the Hudson Institute, who is not testifying here today, but has been a very powerful force.
Across party lines, Democrats and Republicans, you're seeing this emerging consensus around a much more vigorous, aggressive posture towards China.
One of the things that gives us trust in Hudson's perspective is that it's not one singular perspective.
China poses a series of new challenges, and that the status quo was really not sustainable.
The policy of economic cooperation has simply given Communist China the resources to compete with the United States on a global scale, all while they continue to nationalize industries, steal from U.S. companies, deny basic human rights, violently suppress dissent, and pursue policies of religious oppression.
The global economic consequences of the coronavirus are probably deeper and more profound than we realize.
The Chinese Communist Party may be the single greatest challenge our nation has ever confronted and poses extraordinary challenges across the economic, the military, and the political domains.
We are dedicated to seeing what is different in the threats and opportunities of the future and how to make the trends bend to the security and prosperity of America and its allies.
It is time for all nations to join us in holding Iran to a new level of accountability for its destructive behavior.
And neither the Chinese nor the Russians share our commitment to freedom.
Hudson remains an influential group in American foreign policy and needed today more than ever before, because no one up here has ever dealt with the world like the world is today.
So much of our influence in the world has come from the fact that we've been a model, an inspiration to others, a power that others want to emulate.
We have proved for nearly 250 years that capitalism works. As Americans, we cannot give up on the values that made us the envy of the world. We must put those values to work once again, and we are today. And while we renew our economy at home, we must proudly promote our principles abroad.
Hudson Institute is blessed to have experts with the intellectual courage to question what everybody says, and even rethink fundamentals. It takes strength to stand alone at times. This has been the essence of Hudson Institute since 1961 and remains the basis of our service to America and America's allies. Welcome. I'm John Walters, and on behalf of my Hudson colleagues, I want to thank you for joining us and for supporting Hudson Institute. As Sarah noted, this has been a challenging year, and as most of you know, Hudson rose to the challenge. Our experts began by rapidly identifying the strategic implications of the coronavirus for American security and its likely consequences for our allies and adversaries. We collected and analyzed the evidence of the Chinese Communist Party's use of the disease to harm the nations of the world and to distort the world order. And our team explained how America and our allies can counter the threat. We quickly expanded our virtual outreach to policymakers in the U.S. and around the world, to the media, and to you, our friends and supporters. Hudson has continued to do groundbreaking work on the economic and military threats we and our allies face, particularly from China and Iran, and we have expanded our analysis of the Indo-Pacific region, the Middle East, and Europe. We have also expanded our economic analysis and examined the current and future trends in trade, capital flows, and the protection of supply lines and maintaining U.S. technological leadership. 2020 also marked the launch of our Center for Defense Concepts and Technology, which has already produced influential work on transforming defense policy and operations to utilize the revolution in artificial intelligence and other technologies. If you have been watching our policy discussions and events, and as this program indicates, in 2020, Hudson created an even more extensive and bipartisan network of American policy leaders, and we have strengthened our ties to the leadership of America's allies. We are proud of our work on national security, trade, technology, and human rights. You made that work possible with your steadfast support. Even in difficult times, you rose with us to the challenge. And you should know Despite all the disruptions of 2020, Hudson's work has received more attention and interest than ever before. Together, we made a remarkable difference by challenging conventional wisdom to present a better understanding of how to create a better future. This is our opportunity to express our thanks and to ask you, our partners, for your continued support as we face new and evolving threats in 2021. And now, I want to introduce my friend and Hudson's president and CEO, Ken Weinstein. As you know, Ken has transformed the Institute into a policy organization known and respected around the world. It has been my pleasure to have been his partner in this effort. It is a great blessing to work in friendship with Ken on the policies to protect our country and our allies. And we will continue this work in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Weinstein.
Many thanks, John and Sarah, for your very generous remarks. I need to note that I speak this evening in my Hudson Institute capacity and not as the nominee to be U.S. Ambassador to Japan. I've been honored to head Hudson Institute for nearly a decade and to have led this unique team of creative and insightful minds that have brought about fundamental policy change. Only my 3 children are a greater source of pride and joy for me. John, as my wise partner in building Hudson, I know that under your leadership, the best days of this organization lie ahead. I want to offer my profound and heartfelt thanks to our trustees for your confidence in me and for your friendship, and also for your incredible dedication to our organization and mission. There are 2 trustees who stand above the others. Our chair, Sarah Stern, my friend and confidant, an occasional critic, as the best of board chairs are, and our chair emeritus, the legendary Wally Stern, who set the gold standard for selflessness, dedication to country, and to Hudson Institute. I owe a special debt of gratitude to our supporters, public-minded citizens who invest with your hearts, your minds, and your hard-earned money to make our work possible. Most especially, I'm profoundly grateful to my colleagues at Hudson. Your ingenuity and hard work have made our country safer and more prosperous. And if I've succeeded as president and CEO, it's because you are the best in this business. As of January 1st, I'll assume a new title, one that means a great deal to me and to everyone associated with Hudson because of the wisdom, patriotism, and selflessness of the man whose name I will be associated with as the Walter P. Stern Distinguished Fellow. One of the great privileges I've had as president and CEO of Hudson Institute is spending time with leaders around the world. And one of the most impressive leaders I've met in over 25 years with Hudson is the woman I have the distinct honor of introducing, the 7th president of Taiwan, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen. President Tsai has transformed Taiwan's role on the global stage ever since her election in 2016. Throughout her long career, President Tsai has a history of being underestimated. As a Hakka, a member of a Taiwanese ethnic minority, as a woman in the male-dominated fields of legal academia and politics, and as a steady, methodical leader in a country used to politicians known for their flamboyance. But as her opponents in Taiwan and elsewhere have learned, when you oppose President Tsai, you do so at your own risk. No one around the world arguably has done a better job facing down COVID-19 than President Tsai, with no locally transmitted cases in Taiwan in more than 7 months. In so doing, not only has she protected the health of her citizens, but she's exposed the rank hypocrisy of the leadership of the World Health Organization, which continues to exclude Taiwan from its bodies because of pressure from the People's Republic of China. And in the face of outright intimidation and serious threats from Xi Jinping, President Tsai has never blinked. Forthright and focused, she has enhanced Taiwan's defense capabilities, bolstered cybersecurity, and lessened economic dependence on China. She stood up for human rights in Xinjiang and Hong Kong and highlighted for the world the shining example of Taiwanese democracy, a model democracy for the Sinosphere. and she's forged Democratic Taiwan's best relationship with the U.S. administration in decades, receiving high-level officials from the Trump administration while assuring that support for Taiwan in Washington is broad, deep, and bipartisan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome President Tsai to the 2020 Hudson Institute online celebration.
Dear friends, it is an honor to be speaking to Hudson Institute's year-end celebration. This has been an extraordinary year. Humanity has been faced with monumental challenges and incredible difficulties. But throughout it all, our faith in our future, in better days ahead, in the underlying goodness of our societies, this has never wavered. I know that we will emerge from the end of the tunnel stronger than before. I want to thank President Weinstein, Mr. Waters, and your colleagues for holding this virtual gala. Hudson's dedication to advancing freedom, security, and prosperity, both at home and abroad, is well recognized and appreciated. I am grateful that Hudson hosted me in August, together with the Center for American Progress. You also welcomed Vice President William Lai during his visit to Washington, D.C. in February. Both of us appreciated the opportunities to exchange views on the regional situation that we face. History has a tendency of repeating itself. It is becoming increasingly clear that today, the world is once again being faced with fundamental questions of freedom or authoritarianism. As we look at Hong Kong, we see what was one of Asia's most free and prosperous cities descend into fear, anxiety, and instability. In the South China Sea, what was once an unfettered region critical to international maritime traffic has become highly militarized. In places such as Xinjiang, growing religious oppression has led to serious international concern. All of this is leading further and further away from the 21st century so many of us had once envisioned. We are also watching with alarm the increasing provocation from across the Taiwan Strait. PLA fighter jets and naval ships now cross the median line of the strait with regularity, raising the risk of accidents and miscalculations. The PRC has worked to shut the 23 million people of Taiwan out of international organizations, despite our legitimate request to be included on matters of health, aviation safety, international police cooperation, climate change, and more. They are also engaged in disinformation and malign influence campaigns that are designed to cast doubts on our institutions and test weaknesses in our democracy. I want to be clear. We do not desire this sort of cross-strait relationship. What we seek is constructive cross-strait dialogue in order to peacefully address differences of opinion and perspectives without the need for preconditions. We see a necessity for both sides to find a way to coexist peacefully, based on mutual respect, goodwill, and understanding. This has been the basis of my cross-strait policy, as it is a position that best serves the interests of peace and stability in the region. While the 23 million people of Taiwan do not want to live in a state of permanent antagonism, we are also determined to safeguard our freedoms and way of life. We have made it a priority to strengthen our most valuable asset, that is democracy. We have implemented responsible ways to tackle disinformation through openness and transparency. New legislation was passed to respond to PRC's malign influence in our politics. Together with the US and other international partners, we are also engaged on issues ranging from media literacy to accountable governance. These actions signal to all across the region about the resiliency of our democratic processes. We have taken further action to enshrine our principles of religious freedom and respect for human rights. We have inaugurated regional conferences on religious freedom, inviting faith leaders from around the region to participate. Earlier this year, we also established our first ever National Human Rights Commission to better monitor, secure, and strengthen human rights protection within Taiwan. All of these actions are in line with our desire for Taiwan to shine brightly as a light of freedom in the region. Taiwan is determined to take a different path forward. In order to do so, we must also be able to deter military adventurism and defend ourselves in the face of growing military tensions. Over the past 4 years, I have acted on my commitments to increase our defense budget, erasing years of painful cutbacks. We expect that by next year, our regular defense spending will reach $14.9 billion, accounting for more than 2.2% of our GDP. I am determined to see this trend continue. But more important than this is to ensure that we are making investments in the right equipment and training. I appreciate the US has made available new fighter jets as well as new asymmetric capabilities in line with our requests. We are also devoting greater focus towards building up domestic defense industries. The security relationship is a highlight of our relationship, and I look forward to further discussions about our common defense picture with the US. Another issue that is vital for us is our economy. As former Japanese Prime Minister Abe spoke about at this event 7 years ago, few things are more essential than restoring the economy. For a long time, Taiwan's economy has remained stagnant. Wages fail to grow, and our global competitiveness continues to slip. As a consequence of this, talent and capital gradually left our shores for better opportunities abroad. Our trade became increasingly dependent on actors that may not have our best interests at heart. I am pleased to say that this is no longer the case. As a result of the economic and regulatory reforms we have put into place, we have regained our leadership position amongst the 4 Asian tigers. We have continued to maintain positive economic momentum despite the global downturn. Meanwhile, our cutting-edge industries have become crucial to global supply chains, and we are welcoming record numbers of inbound investments. As I have said in the past, economic security is national security. Today, we're better prepared than ever to respond to global challenges. Taiwan continues to seek greater partnerships with other free market economies around the world. Last month, we held our first economic prosperity partnership dialogue with the US, sharing ways we can enhance cooperations on supply chain security, 5G technologies, and global health. Both sides will also move towards formalizing a new agreement on science and technology. But we believe that this relationship still has room to grow. As one article from Hudson states, I quote, "This is the right moment for a US-Taiwan trade agreement," unquote. I could not have said it better myself, and I hope to engage in further discussions in this regard. As we look back at a year full of challenges and opportunities, I am confident that Taiwan now stands on stronger footing. The actions we have taken to strengthen our democracy, to enhance our defense capability, to provide for greater economic security, the purpose of all this is to better secure our future. Taiwan is an indispensable example of freedom, democracy, and free markets. This holds profound significance for the entire Indo-Pacific region, and I'm determined to see this continue. I have consistently believed that as president, my most sacred duty is to ensure that our next generation maintains the right to choose their own futures. Nothing can be more important. And thanks to our friends in Congress across different U.S. administrations and here at Hudson, we know that we do not stand alone in this purpose. As we look around the globe, we find more and more recognition that our future is also related to the future of the free world, a world we all wish to see in the 21st century and beyond. I wish to thank everyone for the honor of joining you tonight. The road to freedom and democracy is long and never easy, but it is one that is always worth taking. Thank you.
Thank you, President Tsai, for those important remarks and for joining this event. And most of all, for your courageous leadership. Just recently, Hudson had the honor to host another courageous leader, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As many of you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu is the 2016 recipient of Hudson's Herman Kahn Award. His most recent remarks were part of a discussion with Hudson Senior Fellow Michael Duran. With our deep thanks to Prime Minister Netanyahu, we now offer some of the highlights from his conversation, with the full discussion available at hudson.org. Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Mike Duran.
You know, you have a reputation for being an avid reader. And I thought it might be interesting to talk to you a little bit, first of all, about the role of your father, the historian, might have had in your intellectual makeup. You're now the longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel. That's an amazing distinction. Nobody's ever accused Israel of being an easy country to govern. Who told you that lie, Michael? When you think of the attributes that have allowed you to garner this achievement, does it strike you that being the son of an historian and of a maverick historian at that has helped you, has shaped you in some way?
I wouldn't call my father a maverick historian. I think he's widely regarded as one of the great scholars of the Spanish Inquisition, and one of the great historians that our people have produced in recent decades. But I will say this, there was a famous unnamed American journalist who was sitting in the office that I'm talking to you now, and came here with his grandson. His grandson was in one of the Ivy League colleges, and he said, I want to go into politics. What should I study? What should I study? I thought he'd say, well, law, and everyone's a lawyer. You know? I said, well, there are three subjects you should study: history, and more history. Because if you study history, you understand the broader forces that are working in the world. My father said to me that the prerequisites for leading Israel is a broad education, broad and deep education. And when he said that, I thought, oh, what is he talking about? He said, no. Because I said you need vision, you need both the goals that you want to set and the ability to navigate, so to speak, ably to achieve that goal And he said, well, you need that for anything. You need that to be a business leader or a university president, but you have to have, to lead a country, you need to have a broad and deep education. Otherwise, he said, you're at the mercy of the bureaucracy and the media. You're like a wind-tossed leaf. But when you understand the forces of history, and when you understand how they work, then you can shape history. You might have a chance in shaping history. But if you don't understand history, you're lost. So yes, my father gave me that. Plus, he told me at a very early age, when I wanted to, I found some notebooks in our old house when I was in the 5th grade, and they're giving us homework on, in history, obviously. And I see these wonderful essays, and clearly I didn't write a word of that. He wrote that. But I remember after a while, he said, well, now you write it. I said, well, then you edit it. And he would say, no, you write it and you edit it. Now, the first thing you have to say is, what is it that you want to say? And then he said, say it. So clarity of thinking and clarity of expression, clarity, I think is the most important technique that he gave to the broader understandings of history, which I view not as a theoretical practice, but as a day-to-day necessity.
That's fascinating. In preparation for this discussion with you, I listened to an interview that David Rubenstein did with you a couple of years ago. And you really surprised me in there with something. He asked you how you wanted to be remembered. And one of the things you said was the liberator of Israel's economy. And after you said it, and I thought about it, of course, I thought, well, that is exactly what you did, and that's no surprise. But it surprised me to hear you say that you were so focused on economics and on the economic dimension of Israeli power. How did you come about that view?
Well, I didn't exactly grow up in a socialist tradition, but that was one thing that obviously paved my thinking on this thing, but it was actually a lot more empirical. I worked in a consulting firm in the 1970s, and I looked at which countries had a chance to grow. And I was specifically looking at Europe for some business case that I was working on. And I thought they were all in pretty horrible shape, but there was one country where I thought there was potential because there was this think tank, which was in many ways spearheaded by a woman called Margaret Thatcher, who believed that you can radically transform economies, including semi-socialist and statist economies like Israel, which Britain was to a certain extent at the time. And I thought these ideas were great. And then she came in and she actually did it. So I believe that we could do the same in Israel, but it was politically very, very difficult to do. But I had a very clear understanding of what drives competitive advantage of countries. And what drives the competitive advantage of countries is the competitive advantage of firms in the private sector of those countries, largely. So the question was, can you fashion a national policy to foster competition, to foster the achievement of competitive advantage? Can you take national policy and national resources and actually direct them in such a way that you will have burgeoning private enterprises that give you more and more resources that you can use for social benefits with lower tax rates? You get much bigger tax returns in certain conditions. And at the same time, so you can both help the country, those who are outside the marketplace, those who are in the marketplace, with competitive advantage. Now, this is something that was utterly different from the prevalent thinking in Israel. And I came to that with a clear understanding that we have to do this. And so when I had the chance, both as prime minister and later as finance minister, I put forward dozens and dozens of free market reforms that catapulted Israel forward. Now, here's an example of what I mean. Normally, people will say, well, if you have education, then you'll have the advantage. Well, that's not true. I mean, the Soviet Union had brilliant scientists and physicists and metallurgists, didn't do a damn thing. But if you take such education and the capacities that we had, and you couple it with a free market economy, then the things take off. Here's an example of what we had in Israel. We had a sunk cost because to keep our military, we had to develop a lot of technology and a lot of intelligence, a lot of people at a very young age coasting the internet highways for intelligence gathering. An enormous number, okay? But when these people left the army, where would they go? Well, they'd go to Palo Alto, they'd go to whatever, Houston. They wouldn't go to Israel because there was no Silicon Valley in Israel, so we had to create a Silicon Wadi. How? By lowering tax rates from 65% marginal tax insane, okay, to liberating all sorts of regulations and so on. And that created this tremendous eruption of thousands and thousands of startup companies in many, many areas. So that's the first phase. The first phase was liberating the economy so that we could use the investments that we put in defense into free market companies. But equally, it's important to understand that we couldn't sustain our defense spending unless we opened up the economy. So I came to the idea of liberating Israel's economy, not merely because I thought it's a better life for our people, it produces the wherewithal, the tax revenues on a lower tax base to be able to fund all the social needs that we have, education, infrastructure, you name it, okay? Which we've done. The real clincher that requires you to do this was that you could not fund Israel's growing defense needs without a free market economy. So you needed free markets, both for the benefit of the economy, the people, but also to fund defense spending. And as it turned out, no, we're doing it both. So I said in that interview, what would I like to be remembered as? I'd say the protector of Israel and the liberator of its economy. And the thing is, they go together. You can't have one together.
If you mentioned comparative advantage. Now, Israel is clearly a unique country. It's impossible, I think, to think of another country of Israel's size that has its power and influence in the world. And this combination that you just discussed, the military, the military ability combined with the economic know-how, has really turned Israel into a power in the world. If you were to talk to a young person in Israel who you thought might one day be prime minister, and you wanted him or her to understand precisely what the competitive advantage of Israel is, what makes it unique, what needs to be nurtured, what needs to be suppressed, what are the 3 or 4 attributes that you would emphasize?
Well, I'd say, obviously, I said study history, but specifically, foster the study of the Bible and history, and the Bible as history, and mathematics. A lot of mathematics. I would say the two are very, very important. The queen of sciences.
Why the Bible?
Well, the Bible is the reason we're here. That's why we're not in Denmark or whatever, or somewhere else. Obviously, it's an important foundation of our own traditions and raison d'etre, and I think it's also part of the tradition of the Western world and the emergence of our modern world, the emergence of freedom. I think that these are anchored in 2 founts, really, of 2 cities. One right here, Jerusalem, and the other is in Athens. And these are the foundations of Western civilization that helped change the world. I think too that that's important for the United States as well, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of values. I think the great thing that happened to, the horrible thing that happened to the Jewish people was that the United States was not the preeminent power in the first half of the 20th century. And the horrible catastrophes occurred there, including the Holocaust. And the fortunate thing that happened to us was that the United States was the preeminent world power in the second half of the 20th century, and that coincided with the rise of Israel, and was very fortunate for us. And if I had to say, all right, what about the first half of the 21st century? Well, I'd say I'd go for the whole thing, for the whole century. I'd like to see the United States, our sister democracy, our great elder sister in modern times, maintain its role as the predominant power in the world because we stand for these common values. You ask why the Bible, why our heritage, why? Because that's the source, that's the wellspring of our values for which I think define our society and define our future.
Are you worried that the United States might leave the Middle East?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think it would be a great misfortune for us, but also for the United States. For us and our newfound Arab allies, we have peace breaking out now, and I think the United States has a vested interest to expand that peace and prevent, essentially support those countries that seek to broaden the circle of peace and constrain and hold back and roll back Iran and its proxies that seek to bring us back to an early and violent medievalism. We have an alliance of the moderates who seek to move our region into the future, and they have an alliance of those who seek to bring it into a dark past. I think the United States should support Israel and its Arab allies and support the expansion of peace. But equally, I think that, and that's important for us, obviously, we all want to see the United States take an active part in the Middle East. But let me say this, what happens if you lose the Middle East? Okay. What happens if you disagree, just get out of the Middle East? Well, this is the nexus of three continents. It's not merely the question of energy, which has obviously shifted. It's a question of maritime routes, the supply lines of Europe, the connection of three continents, and the potential emergence of regimes, especially Iran, that would threaten the United States directly. And I would say that if Israel wasn't here, then I think the Middle East would clearly would be in danger of collapse. And the fact that we are here, the fact that we are the forward position of our common civilization, the fact that we're willing to stand up and protect ourselves, but also thereby also protect our the neighborhood, our allies in peace. I think this is a vital interest of the United States. Of course, America determines its own interests, but I think many Americans understand this partnership of values and interests. Israel is the guardian of common interests and common values in the Middle East, and without it, the world will change for worse in unimaginable ways.
Hi, I'm Matt Hunter, Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at Hudson Institute. I hope you've enjoyed our program so far. We're proud to have leaders from Washington and around the globe join us in celebrating all Hudson has accomplished this year and to look ahead at the policy challenges and opportunities that face us in the coming decade. 2020 has been unusual and unpredictable, to say the least. There has been so much heartache and loss. The coronavirus pandemic has cost so many their lives and livelihoods. In times like these, there are many organizations worthy of your philanthropy and support, and I want to take a moment to thank you for supporting Hudson Institute. Our work is made possible through your generosity. We are one of the leading think tanks in the world because you ensure we have the resources to craft policy that strengthens America at home and abroad, promoting American global leadership hand in hand with our allies, and ensuring that the United States remains the most competitive, innovative economic power in the international marketplace. Hudson's work towards fostering closer ties between the United States and our Indo-Pacific allies, including Japan, Taiwan, and Australia, as well as newer partners like India, have helped ensure that the Chinese Communist Party's increasingly militaristic behavior abroad, suppression of civil rights at home, and denials about the origins of the coronavirus do not go unanswered. H.R. McMaster, Patrick Cronin, John Lee, and Eric Brown look at these challenges every day and provide the guidance that policymakers and the public need to make informed decisions. Our work on science and technological innovation is as important as ever. Tom Duesterberg and Arthur Herman have focused on the criticality of semiconductors, quantum computing, and cooperation between allies in these fields to ensure America and our friends maintain a competitive edge. Brian Clark and Bill Schneider focus on the importance of defense technology and how advances in these fields help keep America safe and cross over into improvements in civilian life. Policy work such as this over the years is one important reason why the United States and our allies will lead us out of the coronavirus pandemic, as the innovation and ingenuity only afforded by a free society has allowed for the development of vaccines in record time. Despite the challenges of 2020, we can't overlook some of the good news. Our most important Middle Eastern ally, Israel, secured peace with more of its neighbors for the first time in a quarter century. And Iran continues to pay a heavy price for its refusal to curb its nuclear program and terrorist activities in the region. Through their work, Mike Duran and Scooter Libby have argued that a rethinking of U.S. policy towards the Middle East was necessary and could promote dramatic, positive change. When you support Hudson Institute, you're supporting these individuals, as well as many others who work to promote policy and educate decision makers that promote a strong America that leads the world in conjunction with our allies. You're also supporting principles that foster innovation and competition. Finally, you're supporting policy that promotes and protects freedom and liberty across the globe. I'd like to thank you once again for your generosity towards Hudson Institute and ask that you consider increasing your support as we close out 2020. With your help, we can continue the important progress we've made into the next year and remain strong for the decade ahead. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, who has established himself as a part of the next generation of foreign policy and national security leaders in the Democratic Party. Congressman Moulton has been a member of Congress since 2015. He serves as Vice Chair of the House Budget Committee and is also a member of the House Armed Services Committee, where he co-chaired the Future of Defense Task Force. A graduate of Harvard University, Congressman Moulton served multiple tours of duty in Iraq as an officer in the United States Marine Corps, earning a Bronze Star for his heroism. I hope you enjoy his conversation with Walter Russell Meade.
I have the pleasure of introducing and speaking with Congressman Seth Moulton, the Democratic representative of Massachusetts' 6th Congressional District. Congressman Moulton was first elected to the House in 2014. Prior to that election, he served 4 tours with the Marines in Iraq. The congressman is a vice chair of the House Budget Committee. He's also on the House Armed Services Committee and its subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces, as well as its Strategic Forces Subcommittee. He's also the co-chair of the Future of Defense Task Force, which recently released its 2020 report. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's good to be here, Walter.
Well, since you are the co-chair of the Future of Defense Task Force, let me start out by asking you, what is the future of defense?
Well, this is the first time that the House Armed Services Committee has taken a 30-year view, looking ahead to what we need to do to keep the nation secure. You know, we're very proud of the fact that we do a defense budget every single year, but that almost necessitates a 12-month look ahead. So the chairman and the ranking member put together this 8-person, fully bipartisan 4+4 committee to take a look at where we're going. And the conclusion is unmistakable, which is that we are going to lose this race with China if we do not make dramatic changes. And to have that conclusion, such a stark indictment of our current path from a bipartisan group of lawmakers, is unprecedented. Look, it took a lot of work to get everybody on the same page in this divided environment. And yet at the end of the day, consensus wasn't that hard to reach once we looked carefully at the evidence. We have a lot of work to do to reform our national security to be able to meet the threats of a rapidly changing world.
What are the most important changes we need to make, in your view?
Well, we have to embrace new technologies like artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Right now, we're throwing a pittance of the defense budget at these new technologies while we're spending tremendous amounts of money maintaining big, old, heavy legacy weapon systems. The Chinese, and even to a certain extent the Russians, are just simply building for the future, and we're stuck in the past. We also have to take a much more whole of government approach to security, recognizing that it's not just about defense budgets and how many troops or ships that we have, but how well integrated we are with our diplomatic forces, how well our basic scientific infrastructure, our research infrastructure, our schools are preparing not only our warriors, our warfighters, but also industry for the technology race that's afoot. How much are we investing in future technologies like biotech that actually could play a role in defense manufacturing? When we talk about biotech in the Future Defense Task Force context, we're not just speaking about the pandemic that's hit us. We're talking about a world where biotechnology is the next revolution in technology in general. We're not really prepared for these things. We're not investing enough of them. And those are some of the changes that we have to make.
When you talk to folks at the Pentagon, do you get the sense that they welcome this kind of analysis, or are you getting some resistance and some pushback?
Both. There are certainly people who welcome it. I mean, look at what the Commandant of the Marine Corps is doing. He's ruffling feathers and pushing ahead, questioning fundamental assumptions about how the Marine Corps is going to operate. He's doing exactly the right thing. I don't even know if he's reached all the right conclusions, but he's certainly asking the right questions. Michelle Flournoy, who was our first witness, in fact, on this panel together with Senator Jim Talent, she clearly wants to embrace the future. Has been banging down my door to get an advanced copy of the report. But obviously, there's going to be a lot of resistance as well. And one place where you're certainly going to feel some resistance is from industry. I think it was John McCain who coined the term military-industrial congressional complex that holds back a lot of these changes. We've already heard from some of these big players in industry who seem intent on resisting these changes, even when doing so is very much not in the best interest of our national security.
When you think about weapons systems that we might need to de-emphasize going forward, which ones do you have in mind? Because that's always the hard part, isn't it?
It is the hard part. And one of the decisions we made early on in this task force is that as much as many of us wanted to single out individual weapon systems, we weren't going to do it because we simply did not have the bandwidth to do so. Excuse me. Because we simply didn't have the bandwidth to do so. But what we have recommended is that we stand up an independent task force as a result of this report that undertakes a comprehensive top to bottom analysis. Perhaps it's run by RAND or a corporation like that, to take politics out of it, take defense contracts out of it, and just do a brutally honest assessment of where we're wasting our money and where we can't afford to keep old weapon systems alive because we have to invest in new weapon systems. Let's not forget that nobody expects defense budgets to go up over the coming years. That's just a reality of the world we live in post-pandemic. So we're not going to spend our way out of this problem. We have to make some really tough choices. And that means making big cuts to make big investments.
You say that defense budgets are not likely to rise. And I certainly, looking at the politics, I would agree with you at the moment. But I'm not sure we're fully in control of that, because if China, for example, continues to grow its military budget, we're going to be under a lot of pressure to try to at least match that, right?
But let's not forget, we're in an economic war with China as well. And if they're able to surpass us with a defense budget that's much smaller than ours, which is essentially what they're doing right now, right? They're investing in all this future technology while our defense budget is bogged down in legacy systems and legacy wars, then they're going to win that fight. Because we no longer have the luxury of saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter because our economy is so much bigger than theirs. Their economy is about to be bigger than ours. So if that's the approach we take, we're destined to lose.
One thing I find myself thinking a lot about these days is the future of arms races in this world of proliferating technologies. Because I think you're absolutely right that whether it's information, artificial intelligence or quantum computing, or whether it's bio tech in some way, the future of warfare and of defense is moving into just a range of industries, many of which are much harder to monitor than nuclear weapons systems and nuclear programs, and which move much faster and are also almost always dual use. And when I think about that problem in the context of arms control, I wonder if we're in danger of losing any ability to do real arms control at the true cutting edge of national power.
Well, Walter, it's a very good question, but I think we had these same fears with the advent of nuclear technology as well. I mean, we had to do a lot of work to develop the technology to enable arms control, and we're going to have to do that work again. One of the things we identify in this report is that we cannot afford to let China set the rules of the road for the use of these new technologies. When I first came to Congress, I was the advocate of a comprehensive drone treaty that might have even included a moratorium on development, because I thought it was advantageous for us to put that in place while we were still ahead. Of course, China is now ahead in drone technology, and that's a real problem for us. We cannot let them set the rules of the road for AI, for other, especially autonomous weapon systems that have the potential to be very dangerous. Especially when you consider the fact that given their value set as a nation, they might not set rules that we're willing to abide by ourselves. So what does that mean? It means that we need to be leading on diplomacy. We need to be leading on arms control. We need to set up a whole new generation of treaties and alliances to help our national security, not just develop weapon systems. All of this has to be part of our approach.
It does seem that verification would be a much bigger problem with some of these new technologies. It's easier to figure out whether somebody is trying to build a bomb. Not that it's that easy to figure that out. Not that we haven't made our share of mistakes, but you know, when somebody is doing something in a biology lab or at a computer keyboard, this is much harder to monitor. So how do we think about verification in this area?
Well, Walter, these are excellent questions, and I'm not going to claim to have all the answers, but you're right that in some ways these new technologies, especially the ones that operate at such a small scale, are going to be harder to detect. But we also don't live in an old-fashioned world where you know, there's an iron curtain and it's hard to get in to see what's happening in Soviet labs. In contrast, there's a lot of exchange of ideas. We have access in certain ways to Chinese labs through the internet every single day. So the bottom line is we just have to invest in arms control and in monitoring for this new world. But we have to modernize this approach to our national security, not just modernize our weapon systems. Or again, you know, we're going to be beat at our own game.
Just a final question here, not asking you as a co-chair of the committee, but just as somebody who's studied this carefully yourself. If you had you know, what is your wish list? What are the technologies? What are the investments you think it's most important that the U.S. make in the next few years?
One of our strongest recommendations is for a Manhattan Project approach to artificial intelligence, to AI. And we've mandated that every new weapon system have an autonomous alternative. That's something that we absolutely need to do. But again, there has to be the diplomatic, the arms control work in conjunction with that. And arms control done right will preserve an advantage for us over our adversaries. That's exactly what we achieved through the height of the nuclear arms race. We also need to invest in biotech. I think that's one of the areas that's easy to overlook because we don't really see the direct national security implications of biotechnology when it's actually used to manufacture things. But that's not far away. And what we learned in the course of this task force is that it's a pretty binary outcome. Either Beijing will win this race or we will. And then everybody who wants to manufacture something with biotechnology is going to go to whoever the winner is. And we can't afford to lose that race. We can't afford to lose that race for our national security. We can't afford to lose it for our economic security either.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much. Great speaking with you. And I look forward to getting together soon in person.
Walter, I look forward to it too. Thanks for all the work that you all do. Thanks for listening to me and these perspectives. This is such an important discussion, and I look forward to continuing it with you and all the Hudson Institute crew. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joel Scanlon, Vice President for Studies at Hudson. I join my colleagues in thanking so many longtime friends of the Institute for their support this year, and welcome the new friends who have joined in our efforts. This, Hudson's 59th year, has brought unexpected challenges to our country, but also a renewed sense of purpose to Hudson's mission of promoting American leadership for a secure, free, and prosperous future. We have launched new programs and initiatives, established new partnerships, found new opportunities for collaboration, undertaken new major research projects, enhanced our outreach, and expanded our influence in Washington and around the globe. All of our efforts have been oriented around a few guiding priorities: to strengthen our national security, to protect America's interests and our allies, to strengthen our economic security through resiliency and growth, and to strengthen our domestic institutions built on America's founding principles. There are few leaders in Washington who have brought clear-eyed and strategic thinking to each of those priorities. Senator Tom Cotton certainly is one. He is rightfully well known to many of you for his decorated military service, his leadership for a strong U.S. foreign policy in both the House and the Senate, and his forthright views on the economic and cultural questions being debated in America. He also has been a great friend to Hudson. It is my pleasure to turn the program back over to my colleague, Walter Mead, for his discussion with Senator Cotton.
I have the privilege of welcoming Senator Tom Cotton to our Hudson Gala. Thank you, Tom, for making this appearance. We have a new administration coming in, which is, and we're going to likely have either a GOP majority in the Senate or at least a pretty moderate Senate, no matter what. What are the flashpoints you see between the new administration and the Senate on foreign policy?
Well, Walter, first off, it's good to join you, and it's good to be back with Hudson. Let's certainly hope that we have a Republican Senate with two runoffs pending in Georgia, with David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler returning to the Senate. There's a big difference. It may not seem that big since the split would only be 50-50, but the custom, according to Senate precedent, would be that Chuck Schumer would be the majority leader. That means that Chuck Schumer controls the majority. So even if he can't pass bills without some cooperation from Republicans to get the 60-vote threshold, that still means that he can bring a lot of bad bills to the floor. And I'm not yet convinced that the Democrats wouldn't be willing to try to eliminate the filibuster. I know some of the Democratic senators have said they won't. It's one thing to say that in the abstract in advance of these Georgia runoffs. It's another thing, should they win them, to say it after facing lots and lots of pressure from their far left. But irrespective, I do think you'll see pretty significant flashpoints on some of the issues that define the Trump era. Look at immigration, for instance. One of the key issues that I think Donald Trump broke rightly from Republican orthodoxy, in part because I had broken from that Republican orthodoxy long before 2016. Joe Biden has promised on day one a series of executive orders, like eliminating the Remain in Mexico policy that says people seeking asylum showing up at our border have to stay in Mexico, or some of the travel restrictions from countries where we can't properly vet people who are coming to our country. If Joe Biden goes forward on day one to rescind all of those, one, he's likely to spark a surge of migration at our border, and he's going to reveal that, much like Barack Obama, he is more committed to a kind of globalist immigration policy that has been repudiated time and time again, not just in the United States, but across much of the Western world. I think that could be a very, very early flashpoint. A second one, obviously, would be taxes and regulatory policy. Throughout the Obama era, we had a relatively slow growth economy that was stuck in neutral, especially as it related to jobs for working class voters. In the first 3 years of the Trump administration, before the pandemic knocked our economy on its back, you had record job growth, and for the first time in decades, most of that job growth and wage growth happening for working class Americans, people who work all day on their feet with their hands, the kind of people who have jobs where you have to take a shower after you get off work, not before you go to work. So I think those are some of the flashpoints on domestic policy. And then, of course, on foreign policy, there are going to be many flashpoints. Some of them relate to American sovereignty and the impact that bad international deals have on American workers, like reentering the Paris Climate Accords and trying to implement radical changes to the way we generate energy in this country and the millions of jobs that are created in the oil patch, and through hydraulic fracturing, through pipeline building, constructing and operating utility plants, and so forth. I assume appointing John Kerry as the climate czar means that that's what Joe Biden wants to do. I mean, it means that John Kerry can go back to his favorite job of staying in luxury hotels in Central Europe while negotiating bad deals for the American people. The president said he wants to go back into the Iran nuclear deal, or some version of it, which I think is the height of folly. That deal was very bad in 2015. It's even worse now that many of its deadlines, such as the deadline for conventional arms sales, have already lapsed. The fact that Iran has already been able to increase its creation of more highly enriched uranium goes to show how toothless that accord was. And that's to say nothing of Iran's malign behavior across the region over the last 5 years. Now, they've pulled in their horns to a degree in the last year and a half or so, partly because we've starved them of the money that that deal gave them in 2015 and 2016, partly because when you kill someone like Qasem Soleimani, a lot of people begin to get a little nervous about adventurism. And then, of course, the big question is China. Joe Biden sometimes talked a tough game on China during the campaign, but he has a longstanding record of prioritizing open trade relations with China that hurt American workers, going back to passing permanent normal trade relations in the Clinton era, passing the WTO accession accord in 2001 in the Bush era, and then being the point man for President Obama with Xi Jinping early in Xi's tenure. So I'm very concerned about the direction our China policy might take.
You think we'll see a lot of confirmation battles over senior positions in, Secretary of State, some of the others that are being announced?
Oh, no more battles than you saw in the Trump era, Walter, I'm quite sure. What's good for the goose is probably good for the gander. We'll probably give the same level of deference to Joe Biden's nominees that Chuck Schumer gave to the Secretary of Transportation, who also happens to be the wife of the Senate Majority Leader, when Chuck Schumer voted against Elaine Chao. My big concern, of course, is that Joe Biden is nominating many people who are far to the left, or in an effort to procure the nomination, have tacked far to the left. Look at his nominee to the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden, who has a long record of far left positions as the head for Center for American Progress. Also has a checkered record in terms of management and controlling her temper, and saying really awful things about Bernie Sanders. I just can't imagine that Bernie Sanders, as ranking member of the Budget Committee, is going to support Neera Tanden. But also there's other troublesome nominees as well. Look, Alejandro Mayorkas as head of DHS is an open border zealot. He was critical of career professionals at DHS, whose job it is, who are trained to root out fraud and visa applications, saying they had a black spot on their heart for focusing on fraud and not on admissions. And it was found by President Obama's own Inspector General to be responsible for overriding their decisions to hand out visas to the investors for well-connected Democratic politicians, people like Terry McAuliffe and Ed Rendell and Hillary Clinton's brother. That's very worse. I mean, I'm not sure that nomination would survive a Republican Senate either.
Let's talk a little bit about possible negotiations with Iran. Do you think you are getting ready to write another letter to any Ayatollahs anytime soon?
Well, one thing I have said since Joe Biden said he wants to re-enter the nuclear deal is what I said in 2015 in that letter with 46 other Republican senators has been vindicated. If you enter into a mere executive agreement with an American president, you cannot be confident the next president will adhere to that agreement, or the Congress won't exercise our role in foreign policy to change that agreement. That's exactly what happened when Donald Trump took office. And that remains the case if Joe Biden simply rushes back into the Iran nuclear deal and takes radical steps like giving the Ayatollahs hundreds of billions of dollars, or removing organizations like the Revolutionary Guard Corps from the designated terrorist list. Any Congress and any future president could reverse those decisions again. So the Ayatollah should be very wary of taking such steps. And we shouldn't take those steps to begin with, because again, it takes so much leverage away from our dealings with Iran and our desire not just to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon, but to address their growing missile force. There are attacks on our partners in the Gulf. There are attacks on Americans that continue to this day in places like Iraq.
Do you see any role for the Senate if President-elect Biden just says, I'm going back into the JCPOA, negotiations are going? Is there anything the Senate can do other than sort of write letters and be unhappy? Or is it kind of within the president's power to push this thing forward?
Well, the president has broad latitude in the conduct of foreign policy, but again, that latitude only lasts for as long as that president remains in office or until Congress exerts some of our power. So for instance, it's our constitutional responsibility to regulate not just domestic commerce, but international commerce, and that's where our power to pass sanction laws comes from. And in the Obama era, part of what drove President Obama to craft the JCPOA is that Congress had repeatedly passed almost unanimously pretty tough sanction laws against Iran. You still have a few Democrats who are relatively skeptical of the Ayatollahs. I'd point out that Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, did not vote for the Iran nuclear deal back in 2015. So did Bob Menendez, the leading Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So even though Joe Biden and those around him might want to resurrect Barack Obama's nuclear deal with Iran, even that doesn't have unanimous support in the Democratic Party.
People often criticize Woodrow Wilson for not bringing any Republicans with him to Versailles, not bringing Republican senators. Do you think there are ways that the Biden administration could reach out to the Senate and get a little bit more consensus on some of these issues?
Well, first off, I'll disclaim I do not intend to travel to Versailles with John Kerry or any five-star hotel in Vienna or Geneva either. But second, sure, the one basic technique any president should use in his negotiations with foreign countries is the constraints that domestic politics impose upon him. It would have been much better if President Obama had pointed out in 2013 with the preliminary deal and in 2015 in the final deal that he faced significant constraints, not just united opposition from the Republican Party, which controlled the Congress, but also in his own party. And that he couldn't concede on some of the final points that he did in the Iran nuclear deal. That's true of trade negotiations as well as when the president was negotiating the New Mexico-Canada agreement a couple of years ago. Domestic political constraints obviously are a way for any president to try to strike harder bargains for the American people, whether it's on security agreements, whether it's on peace treaties, whether it's on trade deals.
President-elect Biden, has had a longer time in the Senate than President Obama did, and maybe understands the Senate and Washington a little better than President Obama. Do you see any signs that that the Biden administration is sort of ready to engage with the Senate in a more constructive way?
I think President Obama may not have been as live for as long as Joe Biden was in the Senate whenever he became president. Look, so in the Obama era, some of it which predates me, some of which I observed briefly from the House, Joe Biden was often dispatched to work with Harry Reid and especially Mitch McConnell at some critical moments for must-pass legislation like the annual spending bills to keep the government open. One would hope that he would work in a cooperative fashion, whoever controls the Senate. I hope it's Republicans. But even if it's not, it'll be a 50-50 Senate, and we'll have the smallest margin in the House of Representatives in modern times. So he's going to have to work cooperatively with Republicans to solve any of the problems that we have. And some of these problems we have widespread bipartisan agreement on it, like the need to reshore some of our critical manufacturing capacity from China back to the United States, or to get a new coronavirus relief package to get people back to work or help those who can't work and get the vaccine distributed. That's going to take Republican support, win or lose in Georgia. And it's going to take Republican support in many cases in the House, because Nancy Pelosi is going to struggle to keep 221 Democrats together on some votes. Joe Biden, as someone who was in the Senate for a very long time, I hope will fall back on those years and not defer to some of the far left voices who want to declare open war on the Republican Party and the half of the American people that we represent.
You were one of the first people to really warn about the danger that this COVID pandemic could pose to the U.S. now that we've seen what COVID can do to the U.S. and to the world, what are your thoughts about the national security implications, and what do we need to do as a country to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I remember back during the impeachment trial when Washington was obsessed with what the president's lawyers and what the House impeachment managers were saying. I will confess that underneath my cover sheet that said impeachment materials, it was nothing but obscure journals about epidemiology and news reports from East Asian news sources as I was following what was then an outbreak of viral pneumonia of unknown sources in Wuhan. And for much of the breaks in those impeachment trials, I was talking to the Director of Legislative Affairs about the need to cancel all flights from China to the mainland to get ready to try to contain this virus in the United States if it broke out. I remember some of my Senate colleagues looking at me like I had two heads when I was telling them that this coronavirus would probably be the biggest story in the world, something that we would remember for decades when impeachment was long forgotten. I didn't have any special knowledge about that, Walter. I'm not a scientist or an epidemiologist. What I do know is that you can't trust a communist, and you can't trust the Chinese Communist Party. And I could contrast what they were saying on the one hand, which was everything's okay, this is under control, there's no human-to-human transmission, with their actions on the other hand, which was locking down, parts of their country that were larger than the state of California and welding people in apartment buildings. Unfortunately, I was proven right about that in the long term. But I do think the pandemic over these last 9 or 10 months has revealed some real vulnerabilities to the American people that we can redress and that we can work across the aisle to redress. As I mentioned earlier, critical manufacturing capabilities, that first revealed itself when it came to things like protective medical equipment, masks and gowns and gloves and face shields for doctors and nurses who are facing a surge in hospitalizations. It's come to light now that we depend on China almost exclusively for so many of our basic drugs, things like Tylenol and Advil and other ibuprofen and so forth. It extends to high-tech areas as well, things like rare earth elements that are a critical component of almost every modern piece of electronics. So I don't think we can allow our chief rival to control so many critical goods anymore. We have to encourage some of that manufacturing capacity to come back to the United States and encourage businesses to never rely on critical goods for sole sourcing or even limited sourcing inside mainland China. More broadly, I think it shows that you cannot trust the Chinese Communist Party. You can't trust them to deal with the pandemic. You can't trust them to keep their word on trade deals. You can't trust them when it comes to military alliances and aggressive action in Eastern Asia and South Asia. I mean, look what they've done in the South China Sea over the last 5 years to break their word about militarizing islands they built out of the water, or to basically invade India and kill Indian troops in the Himalayas, to threaten Australia with all kinds of retaliation because Australians had the nerve to actually say that China's responsible for this plague. You simply cannot trust the Chinese Communist Party.
All right, well, thank you very much. And we look forward to continuing to work with you at Hudson.
Thanks very much, Walter. It's great to be with you again.
Good evening. I'm Scooter Libby, Senior Vice President here at the Hudson Institute. And it's my pleasure to welcome back to Hudson today the at-large member from Wyoming to the United States Congress, Liz Cheney. There, Liz serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. She's had a meteoric rise in Congress. She was just re-elected to the House leadership in the chair of the House Republican Committee, making her the House's third-ranking Republican. Along the way, she's been a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East, an author, a practicing attorney, which I admire greatly, but most of all, she's been and remains a strong and measured conservative voice favoring lower taxes, less regulation, stronger defense, and a leading role for America. I should add that I've seen many officials attempt to navigate difficult policy decisions, often under pressure in Washington. Few can hold a candle to what I've seen from Liz. We're lucky to have her here tonight, and we're especially lucky to have her in the Congress as the next administration starts its tenure. Thank you for coming, and let me turn to Liz. Hi, Liz. It's great to see you today.
You too, Scooter.
Congratulate you on your re-election to Representative at Large for Wyoming, a great state.
Thank you very much.
And your re-election for the House Republican Conference Chair, a terrific accomplishment.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. We have a lot of work to do, so it's great to be able to sort of hit the ground running, and wonderful to have been elected again to represent the people of Wyoming.
Well, let me start again then, since you launch into your work. This seems a very strange time in American politics and also American conservatism. So I was wondering if you had any comments on where things are headed going forward.
Well, I think it's a really important question, Scooter. And I think that there are a number of factors, obviously, that influence where conservatism, where the party, where the nation is headed. I think that when you look at conservatism, I can tell you what I think is really important is really looking back towards Reagan, looking back towards a party that understood and led on issues of defense, believed in a strong national defense, and understood why that was so critical to defending our own freedom. A party also that believed in limited government. And I think that what you've seen from the Trump administration in both of those areas has been some real accomplishments. You've seen investment in the Pentagon to begin to dig us out of the hole left from the Obama administration. You've seen action taking to defeat the caliphate. You've also seen really, I think, the regulatory reform and the regulatory cuts and the elimination of regulation has not gotten as much attention as it should have, but we have really, certainly in Wyoming, that has made a huge difference for us. And pre-COVID, obviously, understanding how important it was to reduce the hand of the state, the size of the power of the state in our lives has been very important. And I think that that's going to be important for conservatism going forward. I also think that conservatism has got to continue to embrace pro-life. I think that we also need to really get back to, as a party and as a nation, an understanding of the importance of American history and teaching American history. This is an issue that, my mother in particular has worked on for decades. And it's just so important as we ask the next generation to step up and lead this nation. They've got to understand what the generations before them fought and died for. And, when you think about the inheritance that we have, we have an obligation that comes with it. And it's much more difficult for our kids to stand up and do what's right in terms of defending policies, defending our freedom, thinking about how do you defend this nation in the coming years without a grounding in the context of American history. So I think that sort of a traditional, really Ronald Reagan approach to things is going to be fundamentally important. Now, COVID has absolutely required that the government step in ways that would not have happened had it not been for the pandemic. And I think that's been very important. And I think one really important model, again, it's something that we have not heard enough about, but we all know the vaccine is coming. And if you look at the partnership that is underway between the US military in particular and the American private sector, Operation Warp Speed, and the effort that's gone on there to develop the vaccines and to put a plan in place to distribute them has been really important. And I think is, going to save lives because that distribution plan's already in place and because of the people that have been involved in putting that together. So I think once we get past the pandemic, we'll be in a position where we really need to think about how to get the economy growing again, how to secure the nation. And I think those conservative principles, that we've looked to in the past are going to be the solutions we need to look to again in the future.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the model set by President Reagan. He focused on increasing the economy, as you mentioned, as part of his focus on the greatest challenge of his day, the Soviet Union. And he, and I think most Americans, understood the challenge of the Soviet Union, although there were wide disparities on the proper policies for it. Today, we face perhaps the greatest challenge of my lifetime, the challenge posed by China, in part because it goes beyond the military realm. It's a technological challenge, it's a financial system challenge, it's an economic challenge, as well as in informational policy and in the intelligence world. The HIPC just issued a bipartisan report which found our intelligence community is not ready to face the China challenge. Even here we are 8 years, 15 years after this has become evident to most people who are willing to look. You are on the House Armed Services Committee. What would you think about how our armed services are ready and how our society as a whole is ready to face this challenge?
Well, I'd say we're not ready. We're not where we should be. And I think that one thing that COVID has done is to shine a spotlight on the damage that the Chinese Communist Party, government of China, has caused globally. I think that before the pandemic, it would have been more difficult to get some of our allies, for example, to focus on the malign intent and the dangerous impact of Chinese government policies. Because of the devastation of the pandemic, you are beginning to see allies around the world understand and recognize how important it is to stand against the kind of bullying activities that we see from the Chinese government. You see the government of Japan announcing that they're going to be providing subsidies to move supply chains, for example. And I think that is very important. I think that what COVID has done is in some ways, at a moment that the Chinese government certainly did not want this kind of a spotlight on them, they are now all of a sudden revealed in terms of the predatory nature of what they do. When you have announcements on the state media in China that they're going to make America swim in a sea of COVID, I think that forces all of us to really have to look at how entangled we are with China economically and to face the reality of the threat they pose. And I think, what we've seen is at a time when I think a lot of us thought they were going to open up politically, that they were going to match their economic opening with a political opening. At the same time, what happened was the rise of surveillance technology. They were never forced to open up politically because instead they could use this surveillance technology that was available to surveil their population. And we know that that's what they would like to do globally. So I think from a defense perspective, we really do need to think about what's our strategy, what's our objective, and do we have the weapon systems we need in order to be able to carry that out? And we need to get back to the kind of strategic planning, development of operational concepts that you were involved in back during Bush 41 in particular, looking at what we did when we were planning how we would defend ourselves and our allies, for example, against the Soviet Union, putting together overall operational concepts so that we aren't simply making investments in existing weapon systems today, but we're really letting our investments be guided by what we're trying to accomplish, what we need to achieve.
Well, you mentioned the COVID challenge and China's embrace of our difficulties of the COVID challenge. There's little question that an authoritarian society with these advanced technologies to keep track of people has advantages in a widespread pandemic over a democratic society where people want to live their lives and have the freedom to do so. This requires, I would suspect, enhanced investment in defenses on our side, which will be in competition with other priorities of the Congress and of the American people. Do you think we'll be able to rise to these multiple challenges?
Yeah, I think we're going to be, number one, we will rise to them. Number two, it's going to require, I think, some difficult conversations and changing the way that we do business in Congress. We are going to see downward pressure on the budget that exists already at the Defense Department, downward pressure across the board on things like biodefense and other areas. And we've got to understand that, our debt itself is an existential threat. We cannot continue to spend the way we've been spending. But the solution to that is we have to figure out how to get mandatory spending under control. And when, we have the battles that we have here in Congress about the appropriations bills every year, we're all battling over something like 26 or 27% of the overall budget. And the rest of it is just happening and expanding. And we're not going to be able to do what we have to do if we let the debt continue to increase, rise out of control. So I do think we're going to have to really focus on that. We just have come out of discussions and decisions about who the Republican leaders, the ranking members on key committees are going to be here in the House. And when we are talking about, the leadership of the Budget Committee, for example, leadership of the Appropriations Committee, these are all very important topics that we're addressing in terms of going forward. I think there's broad recognition that we have to do both what's necessary to get the debt under control, and a huge part of that is also obviously economic growth. And that's one of the reasons the policies of a Biden administration will be so concerning, because we know their approach is going to be fundamentally different. Their approach will be tax increases and expanding the role of the government in our lives. But I think we have a huge set of challenges given our fiscal situation, but also given what our adversaries have been spending their time doing over the 8 years of the Obama administration in terms of building up their weapon systems and being able to challenge what had been our advantage previously.
We have just a few minutes left. Let me just switch topics for briefly. I know you've had a lifelong interest in and been one of our most expert voices on the Middle East. There are two aspects of the Middle East which are going to be revisited by the Biden administration. One is the progress that President Trump made in Arab-Israeli peace and his peace plan, which has so far not succeeded in enticing the Palestinians for Palestinian-Israeli peace. And the other, of course, is the JCPOA. And Biden's declared intent to re-enter that, which probably has altered our relative bargaining position just to begin with. So would you have some comments on either of those two?
Yeah, I think, you put your finger on two crucial issues with respect to what the Trump administration has been able to do in encouraging Arab nations to begin the process of recognizing Israel, to begin diplomatic relations, moving towards bringing Israelis and Arabs together. That has really been historic and important. And I think part of what you saw, frankly, during the Obama administration, in a lot of ways we had, because the Obama administration had aligned themselves with Iran in so many instances. And, I certainly heard this directly from government officials in the region 10 years ago, that they were so afraid that America was now going to be allied with Iran, that the Israelis and the Arabs had a shared interest in really coming to work together to try to protect themselves, protect the region and the world from Iran. What President Trump did when he came into office and he withdrew the United States from the JCPOA was hugely important. It was I think maybe the single worst agreement we've ever entered into as a nation, because it did provide the Iranians a pathway to weapons. People will remember John Kerry giving interviews in the run-up to the signing of the agreement, saying we would have anywhere, anytime inspections, which was obviously complete lie. And of course, the transfer of $150 billion in cash to the Iranians. So it was a terrible policy, and it is certainly really of concern. In addition to your point that Vice President Biden has said he wants to re-enter the agreement, he's naming people to his cabinet, including Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, who was one of the architects, along with John Kerry, of that deal. It was a terrible deal. And it's going to be very important, I think, that the Republicans in Congress and across the board at places like Hudson continue to make clear that, we aren't going to have the wool pulled over our eyes. We understand how important it is. The maximum pressure campaign against Iran has been working, and we're not interested in, and we won't stand by and watch a Democratic administration come in and adopt policies that are going to make us less safe. And certainly re-entering the JCPOA would be one such policy.
Well, challenging times. You have a lot on your plate for going forward. Thank you for undertaking these burdens and being at your office on days when the rest of us aren't.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for everything that you've done and your service to our country, Scooter, and everything you continue to do. So I look forward to seeing you again in person soon, along with the new puppy.
No, that's a deal.
Okay.
Thanks, sis.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marie-Josée Kravis, a Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees at Hudson Institute. And I want to thank all our speakers and our guests this evening for tuning in and for launching this very important discussion. It follows in the tradition of Hudson of addressing issues of critical importance in a very rational, considered way. When Herman Kahn founded the Hudson Institute, after the publication of his book on thermonuclear war, he deplored the reluctance of many to discuss critical issues in a public fashion. And he was intent on raising the level and the quality of our national debate through dispassionate, factual, and rational discussion. And Hudson prides itself in continuing this hard thinking on critical issues rather than the uncritical acceptance of conventional wisdom and fashion. And in fact, we always say that the answer depends on the question asked, not on who's asking it. And more than ever, I think it's imperative that Hudson participate actively in the decision-making process on matters that are vital to our country. I thank you for your support throughout this year, and I invite you to continue to support Hudson in pursuing the critical ideas and issues of the future. I wish all of you a very happy holiday. Hope to see you throughout 2021 and same time, same place. Well, maybe not same place, in person next year. Thank you.